Welcome to Ask Lynn, everyone. This afternoon, I have Natalie with me. So I'm going to let Natalie take it away and start sharing her wisdom and story with you guys.
Thank you, Win. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate this opportunity. My name is Natalie Vecchione, and I am a podcaster. I'm also a parent advocate, and most importantly, I'm a mom of two amazing kids, and our son has an FASD. And for those of you listening who don't know what an FASD is, it's Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder, and that's what I've been asked to talk about today.
Oh,
So
yes, you have. Oh, yes, you have.
I,
Because I am not only trying to teach you guys about cerebral palsy, but I am trying to teach you guys about other disabilities. And Natalie taught me something on call, you guys, which was that, and yes, Natalie and I met before we actually hit record, and which was you guys and ladies think that fetal alcohol syndrome only happens in babies. And what Natalie said, no way, no how, because fetal alcohol syndrome, just like cerebral palsy, goes throughout adulthood.
Yes, yes, and that was one of the main teaching points that I wanted to share with your audience. When is that fetal alcohol spectrum disorders are lifelong disabilities, and I know we made that connection when we talked before this interview. That you and I both know that there are many misconceptions about fetal alcohol exposure, and one of them we shared was that oh well, you only see the symptoms in the young years and in the early childhood years and the even mid childhood years, but yes, it is a lifelong disability, and it looks different in every stage of life, because it's a spectrum disorder, so it also looks different in every individual, because depending on how much alcohol was consumed during pregnancy, and depending on some factors like maternal health, prenatal care, there's a lot of factors that can determine how much the alcohol impacts, especially the brain, because we know that the brain is really the main um, area of damage from the alcohol. So it is a brain based disability that affects the whole body in different ways, and it is a lifelong disability. So again, I'm just so thankful that you're having me on your show to explain a little bit about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders.
Now
Um,
I have a question for you. Would
sure.
you consider fetal alcohol syndrome intellectual disability, or is it similar to cerebral palsy, where cerebral palsy is classified as a neurological disability?
So that's a really interesting point, because it is considered. So the way that the alcohol impacts the brain, it's considered a developmental disability, because
Okay,
there is damage to the brain that affects the developmental level of functioning.
developmental disability. That's what I thought.
Yes. However, a big misconception about FASDs is that someone has an IQ below of what's considered to be an intellectual disability, and that's not always the case. The average IQ can be anywhere from 70 to 120, 130. I have interviewed people that have an FASD that were able to go to college with accommodations, that were able to do things with accommodations. So I think the misconception is that there's always going to be an intellectual disability with an FASD diagnosis. And in the community, it's thought of that, yes, that can happen, and it happens in quite a few cases. However, it's more of a developmental um, a developmental disability. And I'm going to explain in a little bit about how that development is affected, especially things like executive functioning, memory, those types of things. So yes, there are neurological, it is a neurological it's a brain. What the best way I could describe it when is that because of the alcohol, the brain has been damaged, and depending on, again, all those circumstances, the brain has been damaged prior to birth, in that
Yeah.
unborn child.
Yeah.
So just like brain damage during birth, just like brain damage after birth, there are characteristics and symptoms that are going to accompany that.
Yeah. So the little that I know about fetal alcohol syndrome, I know that it's a kid disability, but as we said, it can go up into adulthood. And so, and I know that, and I hate to say this, but a lot of kids with fetal alcohol syndrome have a attachment issues because as as they are babies, they are going through withdrawals, which are the little research I know are incredibly painful because
Yes.
of alcohol, and a kid that's in a brain that's not mature enough to get it. And so, how could we help? And I'm going to kind of go into like this. How could we help the foster parents figure out, okay, is this something that I want to take on? Because people can barely figure out cerebral palsy, let alone fetal alcohol syndrome. People can barely figure out, do I want to take cerebral palsy on? Now, granted, I'm an orphan. I have been an orphan since 2019. And I am having the challenge of my life trying to convince my family that I myself need full time care, which people with fetal alcohol syndrome, depending on the severity, may need full time care and lifetime care and all that good stuff. But I want you to explain to the parents out there listening who think, oh boy, this is going to break my heart. I need to run out the door and adopt these kids. What is the biggest stigma and why? Why did you, as adopted mom, adopt a kid with fetal alcohol syndrome?
So I'm those are wonderful questions, and I'm hoping I'm going to be able to answer all of them. And but I'm going to go back first to kind of the basis of your question about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So FASD, or fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, like I said, is a brain based whole body disability, and there's different diagnoses underneath. About 4 or 5 diagnoses underneath, one of which is fetal alcohol syndrome. And there's also partial fetal alcohol syndrome, alcohol related birth defects. There's a couple other diagnoses. So those diagnoses fall under the umbrella of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And the umbrella of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is caused by prenatal exposure to alcohol. And many of us think that kids that who are born on drugs, like illegal drugs, or any type of drugs like that, it's worse than alcohol in terms of lifelong damage. But actually, alcohol is the worst out of all of those substances because it affects the brain permanently, which in turn affects the body. So to answer your question about foster care and about trauma, um, we know in the FASD community that approximately 80, it's like 70 to 80% of kids that are in the US foster care system have some sort of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. They have it may be severe, it may be moderate, uh, there is the statistics show it's about 70 to 80%. Now, trauma, and a lot of people often think that trauma and FASD go hand in hand. And it does, especially when if you're adopting a child, or if you're fostering a child, from foster care, or adopting a child, whether domestic adoption or international adoption, there are trauma issues, yes, definitely. Um, but with learning about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, you're learning about how the brain functions and how that affects behaviors. So oftentimes people kind of get, there's kind of like a gray area of what's trauma, what is a trauma symptom versus what is a brain based, fetal alcohol symptom. And the best way that I can say is, and this is just speaking, I'm not an expert, I'm just a parent with 18 years of lived experience, Um, the best way I could say that people can support, kids, young adults, because again, it's a lifelong disability. The best way to support someone that has a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is to learn about it. And I will be sharing with you so you can share with your listeners. And you can also get this information on our website, which is fasdhope.com. We have resources of where you can seek training to learn more about it. So when our son was, we adopted our son when he was 2.5 weeks old. And we did not know that he had a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder until he was 15. We spent all those years trying to get a diagnosis. And he had been to, I would easily say, 50 specialists in his young life. And people, we did not know. A doctor, when he was a toddler, had told us that he thought that our son had fetal alcohol exposure, but then he didn't write it down, and he said, "Oh well." And I'm not sure if I shared this with you, but he said, "Oh, we'll just put him in early intervention and he'll be fine." And we know that with any type of lifelong disability, early intervention is key, but it's not going to cure or treat the disability down the road. You know, the earlier the diagnosis, the better.
Ben,
So,
yeah,
and that's with any type of diagnosis. The
that's
earlier you can receive it, the better.
yeah, the
Um,
better.
so I would say, to answer that question, is for caregivers, for loved ones, um, learn about FASD. And there's a number of ways you can do it. And especially now, since, COVID, most of these trainings are online. So that makes it more accessible for many people. But my husband and I took a 3-day training that is, it's called Facets, FASCETS, and it's a neurobehavioral approach to FASD as well as other brain-based diagnoses. And really the main takeaways from that training, and there's many, but a couple of them are, you have to meet the individual where they're at developmentally. So for example, you may have a teenager who's been exposed to alcohol, prenatally, and say they're 16 chronologically, but their developmental age is maybe closer to 10 or 11. And that's because there's certain skills like executive functioning is really key, language, sensory, memory. There's certain skills that are impacted from that alcohol exposure. So developmentally, they're not as they're not like their neurotypical peers. So, my best advice, again, to answer that question, especially for those of you out there who want to support, the FASD community, and or kids, if you're considering adopting from foster care or anything, my best advice would be learn about it, be trained, be informed, and also, find supports, and for our family, a lot of our supports came from people that we didn't expect. Like our son studied to be a carpentry apprentice. We homeschooled our children, and our son, in his last 2 years studied carpentry, and he also studied computer coding. And through our homeschooling, we were able to learn his strengths. We were also able to support his needs because he did have delays in certain areas. And we were able to really focus on, what his strengths were, and to meet him where he is at. And for every, again, since FASD is a spectrum disorder, just like autism is a spectrum disorder, it's going to look different, in each individual. So I would say education and support, and for our family also faith and hope. When you learn about FASD, there are a lot of negative connotations that go with it. People often think of, these kids that, and I'm saying this, I'm kind of saying this, tongue in cheek, but I've actually heard, these kinds of I've heard these comments, but oh well, they're just acting badly, or they just need, stricter, regulations, or they need better rules, or you're not being strict enough. And a lot of people, hear of stories of especially teens and young adults that have an FASD who are either on drugs or in jail, or having serious criminal kind of involvement. And my message to that is that that happens, yes, but that doesn't always happen. I have met on this road of being a parent advocate in FASD. I've met these amazing adults who have they manage it every day. Some days are better than others, especially because of memory and things like that. But there are people who give me hope, as a parent of a young adult that has an FASD. So I would say those three things would be, you know, get education about FASD, and you can do it in a number of different ways. There's great organizations that can do that. Find support groups, again, however you get your support. And then also, just don't lose hope, and don't listen to, you can hear the negative statistics, but don't base your loved one's journey on those negative stories, because there are hopeful stories out there. and
Yeah.
and that's what inspired my husband and I to start FASD Hope, was to provide, that's our mission statement, to provide awareness, to provide, to point you in the way of resources. My husband and I, we don't consider ourselves to be the experts. We're just kind of like the tour guides, and we say, okay, you're looking for this, check out this organization. And then most importantly for us is to provide hope and to provide inspiration, because there can be some um, very scary characteristics, especially in the teen years when puberty exacerbates a lot of symptoms, and that's one of the things we experienced. There can be times where you don't know how you're going to get through, and I have found that in any type of community where there's a diagnosis, whether you are differently abled, or whether you think different, your brain is wired differently, as I like to affectionately say. um there is you would make accommodations. So it's important to know that with FASD, you also need to make those accommodations. And so to end that question, I'm going to point to my friends in Minnesota. There's a wonderful nonprofit organization called Proof Alliance, and they're based out of Minnesota, and they work for the past many years. They've worked primarily in Minnesota, but now, especially because of COVID, they're doing a lot of things out for the rest of the country and actually for the rest of the world. And there are many advocates in Minnesota, and they work tirelessly, lawmakers, advocates, FASD advocates, and Proof Alliance. And in August of this year, um, there was legislation that was passed in the state of Minnesota that anyone who is a foster parent or training to be a foster parent is required to get education about FASD. And then the other part of that legislation is that any child or youth or teen that is in the foster care system is to be screened for FASD. And those are two huge legislative acts. And the FASD community, we have just been like, applauding that legislation. And we hope that legislation like that, is
Goes all
happens
50
in every
states.
state.
Hello?
Yeah.
Goes all 50
Yes.
states because
Absolutely.
the more and more we can like the stigma about FASD and about cerebral palsy, the better off the kids will be in those communities. And
Yes.
and autism spectrums and the list goes on and on. And so the better we become as individuals learning about FASD and learning about cerebral palsy, makes me so happy that someone in Minnesota took the lead and said, hey, you guys have got to learn about FASD before you step into a foster care
Yes.
system.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's just an example of where we can go, as a country, and not only that, but again, um prior to COVID, there was legislation actually for funding for research and awareness and support of FASD. It was actually, prior to COVID, it was just about to get on. I believe it was about to be in the Senate, and one of the lawmakers that spearheaded it was Amy Klobuchar. I know I'm not saying her name right. I apologize, but she was actually one of the Democratic candidates, and for the election. But she has she was one of the legislators that brought FASD national. She brought national legislation to the table. So hopefully that will be, that will come back up. I'm not sure what happened to that legislation, but if that were to get passed and come back up, then that would be another huge step for the FASD community, is to
Now,
get better awareness.
I will ask this general question, and then I will ask a personal question, and I will ask a personal question two ways here. And because of FASD and the memory loss as these kids get older, do I know the autism community like picture schedules? And when I say picture schedules, you guys, you stick pictures on a board and then you hand it to the child. This is what we're doing. We're doing this next. We're doing this next. We're doing this. So, Natalie, is that something that we should implement in the FASD community?
So that's a great example, when of an accommodation, that you would make for someone with, that needs that visual cue. That can be an example, but yes, because of how the memory is impacted by alcohol, sometimes people that have an FASD are able to access information, and then sometimes they're not able to, because FASD, it affects the neurons. It actually affects the myelin sheath, so that the connectivity in the neurons is not always consistent. So yes, doing things like that, visual reminders. My son does really well with visual reminders, like like you said, cards, or just like post-it notes or anything, depending on the individual's level of functioning. Another example of an accommodation would be to break things down into to smaller chunks, because when learning information and when retrieving information, especially for someone that has an FASD and has that complex memory involvement, um, being able to give them more time to process information, um, being able to give someone more cues, and what you said is a great example, of visual cues, and also just learning about that person's learning style, and how they learn information. A lot of people that have an FASD, they're able to think concretely, but because of the alcohol exposure, abstract thinking is difficult, or sometimes just not even there.
Yeah.
So being able to make things simple and clear and short, is a great way to help that person, either with the task, or with remembering something, or learning something. So yeah, that's actually, that's a great example.
I,
And yeah.
I'm laughing because due to my cerebral palsy, my short-term memory is pretty much there, but there are days that CP gets in the way, and I don't remember half the stuff I'm doing. And so, if you could help all these people with learning challenges, including the ones with FASD, that would be wonderful, you guys, because um, memory issues are a big thing. And we're not talking about dementia, we're not talking about all the elderly memory issues. We're talking about 18-year-old with FAS with a FASD FASD. We're talking about a 33-year-old here with cerebral palsy whose memory is okay. I wouldn't say it's great, but
Absolutely.
yeah. But so if you guys would get yourself educated, as Natalie said, about FASDs, that would make me happy. That would just make me happy. And then scoot over to cerebral palsy. The more you guys know about cerebral palsy, the better that will make me.
That's right. That's right. And you know, I like to think when that we're, you know, anyone who's advocating, you know, for a diagnosis, I think that we're all allies, you know, and I think that there are never enough people talking about you know, either having your brain be differently wired, or you know, you are differently abled, or especially, and I'm really appreciate your talking about memory, because that's one of the key components in FASD is memory. So being able to accommodate and support, and also, and this is what I love about your podcast, is that you're an amazing podcaster, and that is a huge strength of yours. And that is probably another big takeaway that I'd like your audience to hear, is that people that have an FASD, when they're well supported, and when you support their needs and you nurture their strengths, they have these amazing, what I like to call superpowers. You know, my son may be 18 years old chronologically, and maybe memory wise, you know, sometimes he can remember certain things and sometimes he can't, but my son knows computer coding probably like a 30 or 40-year-old,
Yeah.
and same thing with carpentry, you know. So we all have our strengths, and I really hope that you know, anyone who's listening, you know, when you have somebody who has a different journey in life, it's so important to support them, and to I like to consider myself and other caregivers to be, we're like treasure hunters, and it's our job to find that gem inside your loved one and to help them so that they can live, you know, the life that they were meant to live.
You took the words right out of my mouth. You took the words right out of my mouth. Now, Natalie, I know you have a couple questions for me as we wrap this interview up. And what are they?
So I am new to podcasting, but I love it. I absolutely love it. I started, as you know, as a result of COVID, and now, you know, it actually inspired my husband and I to start FASD Hope, you know, which is our website. Um, what are your favorite aspects of being a podcaster?
Getting to interview amazing people like you and to and not only educate people about cerebral palsy, but educate myself about disabilities that I didn't even know existed, like fetal alcohol syndrome. And I'm not saying it to be nice. I like most of the world always associated fetal alcohol syndrome with babies and the withdrawals and everything else. I didn't realize that we could have adults that were savant enough with fetal alcohol syndrome up until today, and I excuse myself for my ignorance. Because I have to backtrack what I knew about the fetal alcoholism and what I thought about fetal alcoholism and how challenging it is to raise a child with fetal alcoholism. And so, for those of you who are out there listening and have a child with fetal alcohol syndrome or are considering adopting, yeah, I applaud you. I applaud you because it's it's a long hard slog, and yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's also my favorite part of podcasting too is being able to talk to so many amazing people. You know, people like you and people, you know, our podcast, we talk to a lot of people in the FASD community. So I love, yeah, I agree. I think that's my favorite part of podcasting. Um, my other question was, what do you dislike the most about podcasting? If there was something that you could do without, you know, when it comes to putting your podcast and getting it out together, because like I said, I know your podcast is very popular. What's the aspect that you could live without?
I could live I could live without, and even though I'm on the midst of a move, you guys, I could live without. I just want to go away and not tell anyone where I am going. I just want to go away and hide. Basically, we'll all go away and hide in the next couple months here. And you guys know that I'm on the midst of a move, and you guys know where I'm going, and we don't need to go into all that. But I just want to go away and hide. When I disappeared for the month, last month, trying to organize the midst of a move, trying to organize me, I couldn't tell anyone what I was planning just because of I needed to plan with people behind the scenes, including my stepmom. And so when I started missing podcast interviews and missing YouTube stuff. I also have a weekly YouTube show. Um, People wondered where's Win. People wondered, okay, has cerebral palsy got Win down for the count, or is Win coming back, or what's the deal? So, because of my media presence in the cerebral palsy community, now all over the planet with the FASD community, even though I don't have FASD, I'm still educating you guys on FASD. I wish people would just leave me alone. People would just leave me alone. I mean, I'm not kidding. By the time I will get going to where I'm going, by the time I will hit the other end, I'm not kidding. I will probably have 1,000 text messages wondering if I
Wow.
made it where I'm
Oh my
at.
goodness.
It's like, oh, you guys, I love you guys, but just leave me alone. Just leave me alone. And again, you guys are going to once I give you the official green light go date, you guys will just have to be happy as clams listening to 1,500 episodes about Lynn because I will not I will be, and people have asked me, will you document your journey? And I have not necessarily decided that I will be, but as soon as I get to Florida, I am a fairly lucky duck that could take the time off. And I have already told people I want to take the time off to get readjusted to start healing my own body and healing my own psychological stuff and healing my own traumas. I mean, I I began working in not only working a full-time job, but I began working as a full-time caregiver, not only for myself, but temporarily for my dad before he passed away in March of 2019. And my dad didn't die until May. And for luckily, I only had to do it for 9 days, but for those 9 days, I was exhausted because he was right in the room next to me, and I was concerned if I heard a weird bump in the night. He could have had a heart attack right in front of me, and so yeah, and so I became caregiver with cerebral palsy for 9 days in April of 2019. At the end of March, the beginning of April, I became caregiver. And so, along with help, obviously, but I was his only next of kin. Um, the rest of the help was not only my aide, but his fiance and his stepdaughter. The only next of kin he had was me. And so when push came to shove, I was trying to record podcast, but out of the corner of my eye, I was thinking, will that oxygen compressor go off? You guys, you guys know that in the 9 days we were dealing with it. And again, previously I had to disappear for months. You guys got worried, and I'm like, by the time I came back and explained what was going on, people were like, "You were doing what? You were doing what? You were, yeah." And I'm like, "Yeah." So I haven't stopped working since the end of March, the beginning of April 2019, and I'm ready for a break.
For a
And
break.
so as soon as I get to where I'm going, which is Florida, I'm going to go into hiding for 2 weeks, and then after those two 2 weeks up, I'll be perfectly fine.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yes, I 100% agree that I love podcasting, but it takes up a lot of your time. And if you fall behind in any episodes, yes, you do get, emails. I mean, I haven't experienced that yet, but I've heard other podcasters say
Oh
the
yes,
same thing.
you will.
Where's your
You will.
episode?
And emails and
Well,
you'll get.
I appreciate that advice. I appreciate that advice because I look to you as a podcasting mentor because I'm just starting out in this. So
Well,
and your podcast has such an impact. So I appreciate your sharing
keep
that.
that impact going. But um, as I said, when you're trying to caregive and do a podcast,
Mm.
caregiving and a podcast do not mix.
No,
A
that's true.
yeah, caregiving and a podcast do not mix. So
That's true.
yeah,
That's true.
for those
Yeah.
for those who want to start a podcast, you're more than welcome to it. But just be aware that when you get craziness like I do, it's hard to take time off.
Yeah. 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 The only time I can, so it's funny when I schedule interviews on my podcast, I can only do it between 7:30 and 9 in the evening or Saturdays and an occasional Sunday afternoon. I have to do it when my husband is able to be with our kids because, my caregiving is different. My caregiving is is kind of a, everyday kind of thing. And especially having having kids, one of them, even though he's 18, I still need to just kind of keep check on him,
Yeah.
so yeah, I agree. If you want a podcast, and if you do, whether parent or caregiver or whatever, make sure you have you have somebody that can help you with that aspect of your life. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I'm
I
like,
agree.
ugh. Yeah. And people have asked me, well, will journalism come into play when you get to Florida, or will it be the same cycle as CP comes first and journalism comes second? Well, I'm happy to report if if Plan A goes according to plan, that journalism will be my center focus after those 2 weeks, because I am a very lucky duck that I only have to train a couple people to work with me, and they will understand cerebral palsy in 2 seconds flat. So if all goes according to plan and plan A comes into effect, journalism will come number one priority.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I
And
still have to that's one of the things I plan on doing during my Christmas break is checking out, some of your books and some of your writings because,
yeah, well,
like you said, right now I've got, in this week alone, I think I have 7 interviews scheduled. So
oh,
it consumes you,
yeah, it
yeah,
consumes. So
yeah. So
where could people find you, and where could people get a hold of you if they choose to do so? And
sure.
if they are in the FESD community, how could they apply to be a guest and all that good stuff?
Absolutely. So, our website is fasdhope.com. And that is our main website. We have our all of our podcasts on there that you can listen to. We have a media player on each episode, so we have our archived podcasts as well as our most recent ones. And on that, my husband has, he works full time, so he's been doing this, in the evenings and on the weekends. It's been a labor of love. And then we also have a resources page on there, so people can find FASD trainings, FASD education, FASD diagnostic clinics, which is really important, and also just state and national FASD organizations. So that's one way you can get in touch with us. You can also listen to our podcast, which is FASD Hope. We're on most of the major channels, Apple, Spotify, all
Yeah.
those, you can just look us up. And then on Instagram, we are at FASD Hope. On Facebook, we are at FASD Hope 1. We also have a Pinterest account, and that is at FASD Hope 1. And then finally, if you want to get in touch with me, I'm happy to answer any questions or hopefully point you in the right direction. And you can reach out to me, info at fasdhope.com.
Okay, you guys, go Scoot. You know how to subscribe to a podcast. Go break Natalie's podcast feed as soon as
Oh,
this episode drops, which will be in the next couple weeks. And please, 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 please leave a review. It doesn't have to be 5 stars, it just has to be a review in Apple Podcasts for both FASD Hope and Ask Win, because the more you do that, the better off it will be. And the more eyeballs will see both podcasts, and both podcasts are educational podcasts. And so, yeah, that's my call to action. And I really appreciate you guys supporting me and supporting all my chaos. And I will catch you guys next week. And I hope you guys enjoyed another fabulous episode of Ask Win. Thanks, you guys. Bye, you guys.